This is a navigation module from a E65 BMW 7 Series, same in the E66 obviously, all model years, slightly different part numbers, but they're all the same and they all have the same problem where in quite a short amount of time the DVD drive module itself dies. So the tools needed, absolutely essential: T9 Torx driver, a sharp blade, any screwdriver that we're going to use for priming the top off in the first stage, and a soldering iron is also a must. Let's get started. Okay, so first step is to break the seal that we're not meant to break, but we have to be brave and accept that we don't have a warranty anymore on our 20-year-old navigation unit. Now, you don't need to undo any screws to remove this top cover. It's just folded sheet metal that you can prise off. There's a few locations where you can get your screwdriver in. Okay, so now with the top panel removed, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 T9 Torx screws to remove. Okay, so with the 4 screws removed from each corner, we can now lift the DVD drive up. There's some very fragile electrical connectors under there, so we can't just pull it straight out. You can see that ribbon there, and then that connector on the edge there. So let's unfasten those first. So to undo this one, it's a fingernails only job. I'd say no tools allowed. This is all too fragile, so wiggle and pull, not on the wires, on the connector. And if it's not coming, just take a break, swap hands. The last thing we want to do is stress this connector and break something. So with a good bit of wiggling, that's that one out. You can now turn the drive over and access this one. So for this one, again, keep your tools away. What we want to do, you see that the black plastic on there? That black plastic comes away ever so slightly, and that releases the tension on the ribbon cable. So there we go, it's popped away, and then that ribbon just pulls out, and that is the drive removed. So now let's put this to one side. We're done with that for now. And you'll notice if you've bought your new DVD drive that it's missing a component. It doesn't have the PCB. So the PCB is the very expensive bit. The drives are somehow extremely cheap, even though they're so complex. So we need to transfer this PCB to that new drive. So to start transferring the PCB, the first thing we can do is undo these small electrical connectors. One there and one there. Again, no tools, just fingernails, wiggle, be consistent, and they will come out. Next, we're back with our T9 Torx, and we've got 1, 2, and then there's a hidden screw in that hole there. You can just see the Torx head, and we need to undo that. Undo these two first, because this one will lift the PCB, so we want to have removed all other hold down methods before we lift it up. Okay, so you mustn't just lift this PCB off. I've done it in this order so that I can show you a quick sneak peek underneath. Hopefully you can see, if I can get the light to poke in there, some very fragile ribbon connectors, 1, 2, 3 of them. So I'm going to put that back down and not disturb them for now. What we actually need to do is remove this metal plate to be able to unplug the ribbon connector that's in the middle. So removing this metal plate is where the job becomes a bit specialist. So far we've just undone screws and unplugged connectors. Now we've got to desolder the 4 corners of this plate, the one's just there, and then after desoldering we can lift it up and access the connector underneath. To desolder we use an iron, obviously, so I've just turned mine on, just a cheap one, and a desoldering sucker. So this is a really nice one, got it on Amazon, very highly reviewed. So you heat up the solder until it's molten and then put this over it and suck it up. I'll show you that process now. Okay, so we're going to desolder the 4 corners and suck up the solder to allow us to remove the plate. Just a little tip if you're not familiar with soldering. Some people apply the iron to the pad and they'll get it so hot that everything's red hot. They'll smell the PCB burning, but the solder still won't melt, and they don't know why it's not melting. If you just have a tiny bit of solder on your iron, so just take a little bit and blop it on your iron. Don't worry about adding extra solder. This is just going to help with heat transfer and make that solder melt rapidly before the heat spreads everywhere else and you do damage. You don't want to get everything else on the board red hot. We just want to quickly melt the solder and suck it away. Okay, so apologies, I don't have the best camera set up to see this in detail, but I'm applying my solder. It's all now molten and sucked it up. And just to show, that's the bit of solder that was sucked up from that last one, so we'll move on to the next one now. Another thing to be careful of is where the rest of your iron is. So you can imagine trying to touch the tip of the iron to the solder whilst having this big knurled boss burning the edge of the PCB there. So just be conscious of where everything is and just apply heat where you need it. That tip about being conscious where the hot parts of your iron are is especially important when there's an electrical connector nearby, such as this one. When I'm going for this blob, the last thing I want to do is melt that and make it impossible to plug in our new drive. So I'll come in from the side, solder's molten, and it's off. Okay, there we go, we're off. Okay, so now we can see this is the connector I've been talking about that we need to undo. We could never have done that with this plate on, so that's why we had to do the desoldering. So let's get on with that. Okay, so to remove this one, it's the same story as a lot of the others. No tools because we've got delicate traces all around, but it's the same story as the others. We're going to pinch on the black plastic part, it clicks back, and then you can tease the ribbon out. There we go, so it's all very fragile, so just be careful with it. And with that one out the way, we can remove that screw, by the way, that was underneath the metal shield. The metal shield, by the way, is just to stop electromagnetic interference on some sensitive circuit board components. So with that connector removed, we can expose, wrong end, we can expose these two under here and unfasten them by the same technique. So to unfasten these two, we can now fold that PCB over. I'm just going to put the disk drive down, and then, usual story, pinch, slide out, pinch, wiggle, and slide out. And now that is our dead CD DVD drive that we can put to one side. Don't mix it up with your new one. And then this is the PCB that we're going to put on our brand new drive. Okay, so on your new drive, the cables are just neatly tucked away to protect them in transit. So let's pull those out. Never twist one of these cables, they tear very easily and it breaks the tracks. Also, never kink them. Some of them will have a kink from factory. That's, I guess, okay. It's not ideal, but that's how they come. But yeah, never add any new kinks. Okay, so if you remember, the board sits like this on here. So we need to get these two ribbon cables into the two connectors on the end. So So it's really important that you push these in far enough. They go in very easily, and you just have to make sure that they stay in the right position whilst you fasten the plastic clip. There's a test to do to know if you've got it in, and it's quite a simple test. You just give it a gentle pull, not hard at all, just a gentle pull, and if it stays in, it's in. Okay, so now onto the smaller one, same again, push it in. Again, it should take no force to push it in. If it takes any force, you're not aligned properly, or your plastic clip isn't all the way out. So just keep fiddling until you get it. There we go, it's gone in. And now that it's in, same again, and close the clip. Okay, and we can do the same check again. Very gentle pull, confirm that it's in properly. So now we fold that PCB over, thread this ribbon through the hole, and we're ready to make that. Okay, so I've just pulled these wired connections out so that they don't get trapped underneath. Now with this ribbon connection, it's important to make sure that most of the slack is underneath through the hole, because there's a moving mechanism, and this ribbon cable sort of rolls back and forth on itself. It moves with the mechanism. So if you've got all the cable up on the top, that's not going to work. So take the ribbon. We're getting used to this now. It's fiddly, but we just got to slide it in there above the black clip. So that's in, and then close the clip. I know that you can't see much because of my fingers. There we go. So that's now connected. Okay, so for these small connectors, it's always the visible bits of the pins sort of facing up. If you can't get the connector in, you probably need to flip it over, because they go in sort of really quite nicely. Okay, so that popped in. So that's that little one connected. Okay, so now to put some screws in and fasten the board down. So these little tabs go into the sheet metal slot, and then we've got our 3 screws to put in. Remember the one here that gets hidden underneath the metal shield? One thing you'll notice when you start threading these in is that the thread isn't cut, there's just a hole in the sheet metal, and putting the screw in is what cuts the thread. They are effectively self-tapping, even though they're not self-tapping style screws, they're metric M2.5s, they are cutting their own thread. So it feels a bit horrible, and you've got to apply a bit of force. So just make sure you don't jump off and end up knocking a component off the board or breaking something. Alright, so that's our 1, 2, 3 screws in. All electrical connectors are fastened. The next step is to get our plate back on. This is where it gets a bit specialist again, because we have to solder it. So that's the plate on, clipped in all its little clips. I'm about to solder the corners. Okay, so that's the plate on, snapped into all the little fasteners, but it's not yet soldered. If you left this unsoldered, first of all, it wouldn't do its job very well of EMC protection, and secondly, if it was to pop up due to vibrations, it's going to short circuit the board. The DVD drive might be cheap, but these boards are not, so you must solder it down. Okay, so again, be careful where you're poking your iron. I've got a good bit of solder on the tip. I'm applying the heat to the pad and the metal plate simultaneously, feeding in a little bit of solder, and that was a bad joint. You can see it's kind of fiddly. There we go. So here around this side, for me, I have to swap hands, so I'm a bit jittery with my non-dominant hand, but I'm sure we'll get a bit of solder in there. Okay, what was on the iron was enough. We've got a really nice solder joint in there. Okay, so last one, I've got a healthy blob of solder on the iron. I'm just going to apply it there until I see the pad wet out, and that's it done. So the plate is now soldered on. That's all the hard work done. Now for the final reassembly. Okay, so we've got our new CD/DVD drive with our original PCB mounted, everything fastened up correctly. We now just need to connect these two electrical connectors, the ribbon and this 8-way cable, and then we can do the final reassembly. So I'm connecting the ribbon first. I've just pulled the plastic clip out. These plastic clips can come all the way out, which isn't great. If you break it, you're in trouble, so I guess don't break it. I'm going to push that in all the way. It goes, there's a nice little, as it sort of clicks in, you can see there's a small amount of the blue line showing, and then I can fasten the black plastic clamping piece, and that's going nowhere, that's in there perfectly. And now I can turn this over, rotate this and connect the other side. This last connection's a dead easy one, so we line it up, push it in, and that's it. All of our connections are intact. So now all that's left to do is to lower the DVD drive in, hook it under there, make sure this ribbon cable is tucked under, and then we've got to put our 4 screws in. It can be a bit of a nightmare if you drop one of these screws into the bowels of the DVD player, so again, just don't do that. Now time for the top plate. This step is relatively easy, just get it lined up, make sure the edges are lined up nicely, and just pop it down. Job done, that's ready to go back in the car. So with these BMW 4th generation navigation modules that are found in the E65 7 series, they break all the time. It's been a problem for over 20 years. And if you go on eBay, Facebook Marketplace and just buy replacement drives, you're in for a really frustrating process because almost none of them work. The job of replacing the broken CD drive or laser, which is all in the same unit, is really straightforward, really cheap. If you're not competent following the process in this video, you can have me do it for you. I charge a fair price to do this job and then ship it back to you working. Or yeah, you can chance it with some eBay navigation modules, but just make sure they've got a good returns and refund process. Thanks for watching.